Now, 2 Rotherham child abuse victims were left out of court for their sentencing of their rapists. GB News can exclusively reveal. Our national reporter Charlie Peters has his exclusive, and he joins me now in our studio in Westminster. Charlie, once again, a cracking story by you. You've been all over this story, making sure that survivors get the oxygen of publicity and the support they need. This is an astonishingly heavy-handed and leaden-footed oversight. Tell us what happened.
Well, it's a human error, an officer error, as the National Crime Agency put it to me, because last Friday, Neil King, a 51-year-old, was sentenced to 21 years imprisonment for 17 sexual offences he committed against 2 children. 16 years ago, they finally had this moment to achieve justice, to see their abuser being sent down for that lengthy and significant sentence. But unfortunately, due to an error by one of those National Crime Agency officers, they were left out of the courtroom for that critical moment. Now, I've spoken to several survivors about this story since we broke it this morning, and all of them say that being able to witness their abuser being sent away was a crucial part of that experience. Now, the NCA told me that they have personally apologised to both of those survivors. They're going to do further. They're going to write to them as well. And as I understand it, a judge who was involved in that sentencing last Friday did sit this morning to allow those survivors to come back to the court after they were missed last week, to apologise to them and also to pay respect to their tributes for their efforts in the trial to achieve this justice that has been delivered.
OK, Johnny will stay with us, because joining us now is the former detective and Rochdale sex abuse ring whistleblower, the legendary Maggie Oliver. Maggie, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have your company. This is just another terrible, terrible indictment, is it not, of a system that seems to put the survivors last in the queue when it comes to who gets the lion's share of the attention, of the sympathy. And Maggie, it must be so, so important for those survivors to get their moment, to see their perpetrator go down, to have that so cruelly snatched away. Must be devastating, Maggie Oliver.
Yeah, good afternoon, Martin. No apology will ever make this right again. That was their moment. 16 years of perseverance, of pain, of fighting to have their abuser sent to prison. Now, as Charlie's just said, and Charlie's done a great job constantly shining the spotlight on not only the failures about grooming gang survivors, but about the system that we have in our country, which is really in so many ways unfit for purpose. I often say that victims and survivors are an afterthought in our criminal justice system. When you think that a victim who has been through what these 2 young women have been through is referred to often as a witness, they are a commodity, they are useful. And yet at this moment in time when their rapist is going to be sentenced, they're forgotten about. They are an afterthought. They are not part of the process. Whereas the offender will have a whole army of people making sure he's in court, making sure his human rights are looked after. The system is broken. And, the person responsible has made a mistake. But it shouldn't be left down to one person to make sure that the rights of those victims are being put at the top of the queue. The system should be looking after them. I worked in major crime for 16 years, and as a family liaison officer on many murders, my job was to make sure that the families were in the court, were looked after. My guess, and I'm looking at my experience as a police officer, is that these 2 young women were left on their own outside the courtroom. It might even have been someone from the witness service who forgot to take them in, but it's very clear that they were not a top priority. A victim is useful at the beginning of a process when they give a victim, they give their interview, their video recorded interview. At the end, they are useful when they give evidence in court. In between those 2 moments in time, they are in many ways surplus to requirements. They're no longer needed once they've given their interview. But that moment for them was the moment they have waited for, probably for most of their lives. And I feel for them. I think it's a good thing that the judge is going to apologise, but nothing will make it right for them. And, I would refer to the story that Charlie did the other week as well about the victim impact statement, where the court redacted or edited certain comments out of the victim's impact statement. Again, treating a victim as an afterthought and as somebody who is a little bit of an inconvenience, actually, in the process, once the system has got what it wants from them. And I think it is unforgivable. It is another example of how we need to really rewrite the way we deal with victims of horrific child abuse.
Maggie, Charlie Peters is with me in the studio. He'd like to ask you a question.
Maggie, you've just raised that we've spoken twice in the last couple of weeks about failures coming out of Sheffield Crown Court with regards to survivors of child sexual exploitation. That survivor having their testimony censored by a judge, and now 2 survivors being left out of the courtroom. Why do you think that victims are not being put central to the judicial process?
You know what, Charlie, if I'm being perfectly honest, they're seen as a nuisance. In my charity, in the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we advocate for victims who are treated often despicably. And the system doesn't recognise them as being important. They are seen as a commodity. They are flavour of the month at the start of a big job because the system needs their testimony in order to take an abuser to court or a murderer to court. But once that testimony is gathered, they don't get regular updates. They don't have an officer looking after their needs. They are very often left to their own devices. They can't get information. They don't have one point of contact. Officers move on and they're left to start all over again with a new person. This is not an isolated case. On the Rochdale case that you mentioned, the young girl Ruby, whose abuser was released from court, she didn't even know he was out of prison. These are all examples of what is repeated failures to recognise the needs of victims and survivors. They deserve to be heard, to be treated with respect, to have their human rights considered in all of these processes. But sadly, the rights of the offenders, of the abusers, are top of the pile. They are flavour of the month. Everything is done to safeguard their rights. Where are the rights of the victims? And nobody saying sorry will ever be able to put this right for those 2 young women. That moment is gone. It's better that they do get an apology, but it will never make up for what they have lost last week. And I am really, really sad about that. An apology are empty words, really. It should have been planned for. It should have been a given that there would be people there to make sure that those 2 women were in there, were looked after, were supported, not just by one officer who happened to forget. It might not even have been an officer who forgot. It could have been the witness service. I don't know. But whoever forgot, it's just not good enough. And I'm really sad for those two young women. I really do feel for them. I only hope that when their victim impact statement is read, if it is read, that's not redacted and that they are allowed to give their thoughts and their feelings about what's happened to them and how they've been treated.
OK, Maggie Oliver, thank you so much for joining us and for your tireless work. And thank you, Charlie Peters, another fantastic exclusive. Thank to both of you.